The massive viewing screen at the Galactic War Academy showed a small blue-white planet, the newest addition to the Confederation. Professor Xilnak's four eyes blinked rapidly as he watched the recording of the latest space battle simulation. His green scales shifted color slightly, a sign of his growing frustration. "Play it again," he ordered the computer. "Show me what the human officer did." The screen flickered, and the battle replay began. The human ship, U.S. Constellation, appeared to be cornered by three enemy vessels in a standard triangle formation. According to every tactical manual in the Academy's 1,000-year history, the human ship should have surrendered or been destroyed. Instead, Lieutenant Laura Bennett had done something entirely different. The recording showed the Constellation suddenly cutting its main engines. In the complete silence of space, the ship dropped like a stone, using the nearby planet's gravity well, in a way no Academy graduate would ever consider proper. The enemy ships, programmed with standard Academy responses, tried to adjust their formation. But by the time they did, Bennett had already swung her ship around the planet's curve, using minimal power to stay just ahead of the orbital path. "Impossible," Xilnak muttered, his scales now turning a pale yellow. She turned off the engines in the middle of combat. "It goes against every principle we teach." But the recording wasn't finished. As the enemy ships adjusted their course to intercept, Bennett fired up the Constellation's engines at full power. The sudden burst of speed, combined with the gravitational slingshot effect, sent her ship hurtling past all three enemies. In the confusion, she managed to disable two of them with precisely aimed shots to their engine sections. The third enemy ship, still following Academy protocols, tried to establish a new attack vector. But Bennett had already reversed course, using the momentum from her slingshot maneuver to circle back. The final enemy vessel never stood a chance. Xilnak paused the recording and slumped in his chair. In his 40 years of teaching at the Academy, he had never seen anything like it. The human officer had ignored centuries of established space combat doctrine and instead relied on what she later called gut instinct in her report. A soft chime announced the arrival of Dean Vaxfall to his office. The dean's crystalline form caught the light as he entered, creating small rainbows on the walls. "I assume you've reviewed Lieutenant Bennett's simulation?" the dean asked. Xilnak nodded slowly. "It's troubling, Dean. She broke 17 different combat protocols to achieve her victory. If we grade her according to Academy standards, she should fail." And yet, the dean's voice carried a hint of amusement. She achieved a perfect victory with no damage to her own vessel. "How do you suggest we handle this?" Before Xilnak could answer, another alert flashed on his screen. A new human cadet, Tim Murphy, had just completed his first training simulation. Xilnak quickly pulled up the results and felt his scales shift to an even lighter shade of yellow. "By the stars," he whispered, "this cadet just did something even stranger." The dean moved closer to watch. In this simulation, Murphy had been given command of a small patrol vessel facing a pirate fleet. Instead of following the standard procedure of calling for reinforcements and maintaining a safe distance, the human had flown his ship directly into a nearby asteroid field. "Computer, play Murphy's combat log," Xilnak commanded. Murphy's voice filled the room. "Since the pirates are following Academy tactical protocols, they'll expect me to stay out of the asteroid field. That's exactly why I'm going in. Their ships are faster and better armed, but I bet they won't risk their fancy hulls in there. Meanwhile, I grew up playing dodgeball. This isn't so different, just bigger balls to dodge." The recording showed Murphy's ship weaving through the asteroid field with surprising agility. He used the large space rocks as cover, occasionally firing his engines to push smaller asteroids toward the pursuing pirates. The pirate ships, programmed with standard Academy responses, kept their distance from the field as predicted. This gave Murphy the time he needed to circle around and attack from an unexpected angle. He turned a tactical disadvantage into an advantage, the dean observed, just like Lieutenant Bennett did with the gravity well. Xilnak pulled up more data on his screen. We're seeing similar patterns from other human officers and cadets. They're all using what we would consider obsolete or improper tactics, yet achieving remarkable success rates. Perhaps, the dean suggested, we should consider why these improper tactics work so well. Just then, another alert caught their attention. Laura Bennett had begun a second simulation. This time, she was commanding a small fleet against a superior force. Zilnak and the dean watched in astonishment as she split her ships into seemingly random patterns, creating what appeared to be complete chaos. But it wasn't chaos at all. Bennett was using the apparent disorder to mask a carefully coordinated attack plan. The enemy fleet, following standard Academy formations, couldn't adapt quickly enough to the unpredictable movements of her ships. "Look at how she's using the confusion to her advantage," the dean said. "The enemy commanders can't predict her next move because she's not following any standard pattern." Zilnak felt a deep unease settling in his stomach. "Dean, what if everything we've been teaching is wrong? These humans are achieving better results by ignoring our tactical doctrines entirely." "Not wrong, Professor," the dean corrected. "Just incomplete. Humanity has brought something new to our understanding of warfare: unpredictability. They have thousands of years of military history, all confined to a single planet. They've had to learn to adapt, to find advantages in seemingly hopeless situations." As they talked, more reports flooded in from other simulation chambers. Every human officer and cadet was showing the same tendency to ignore standard protocols in favor of what they called thinking outside the box. The dean's crystalline form sparkled as he turned to leave. "Professor Zilnak, I believe it's time we revised our curriculum. Humanity has shown us that there's more to space combat than following established protocols. Much more." Zilnak looked back at the replay of Bennett's gravity well maneuver, then at Murphy's asteroid field tactics. For the first time in his teaching career, he realized he might have as much to learn as he had to teach. The Academy would never be the same, and this was only the beginning. Professor Zilnak stood before the Academy's High Council, his scales now a worried shade of blue-gray. The large chamber was filled with representatives from 20 different species, all gathered to discuss the growing human problem at the Academy. "In the past 3 months," Zilnak began, "human cadets have broken every major combat doctrine we've established. Yet their success rates are unprecedented." He gestured to the holographic display showing Tim Murphy's latest training exercise. The young human cadet had taken command of a damaged supply ship. Instead of following standard procedures for damaged vessels, Murphy had deliberately vented oxygen from several cargo bays. The frozen oxygen created a cloud of ice crystals in space, effectively giving him a smokescreen. He then used this cover to escape from 2 enemy cruisers. "This tactic," Zilnak continued, "draws from something humans call submarine warfare. They developed these strategies for fighting in their planet's oceans, but they're adapting them for space combat." A crystalline council member chimed in, her voice ringing like bells. "But surely their primitive naval tactics can't compete with our advanced space warfare protocols." Just then, an alert flashed across the chamber's main screen. Laura Bennett was conducting another combat exercise, this time commanding 3 ships against a fleet of 6. The council members watched in silence as she positioned her ships in what appeared to be a severely disadvantaged formation. "By all standard calculations," Zilnak explained, "Lieutenant Bennett's position is tactically unsound. Yet watch what happens next." Bennett's ships suddenly cut their main engines, just as she had done in her previous exercise. But this time, she had positioned them near a dense asteroid field. The enemy fleet, following Academy protocols, moved to encircle her ships. "Now observe," Zilnak said, his scales shifting to an interested purple shade. Bennett's ships fired their maneuvering thrusters in short, precise bursts. To the Council's astonishment, their movement disturbed the smaller asteroids around them, creating a chain reaction. Dozens of space rocks began moving toward the enemy fleet. "She's using the asteroids as weapons," one council member gasped. "More than that," Zilnak corrected. She's using them as a distraction. While the enemy fleet was busy avoiding the asteroid shower, Bennett's ships had quietly moved to higher ground, or what humans called up bubble in space combat. From this elevated position, they had a perfect firing angle on the preoccupied enemy vessels. The exercise ended with another victory for Bennett. The council chamber erupted in worried murmurs. "There's more," Zilnak said, pulling up another recording. "This is Cadet Alan Peters in yesterday's defensive exercises." The display showed Peters commanding a small space station. Instead of fortifying the station's defenses as Academy doctrine dictated, he had deliberately shut down several key systems. He made the station appear more damaged than it was. Zilnak explained. When the enemy ships moved in for what they thought would be an easy capture, Peters revealed his hidden weapons. He called it playing possum, apparently referring to an Earth animal that pretends to be dead to avoid predators. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, a gaseous being contained in a transparent sphere, spoke up. "These humans are introducing chaos into our carefully ordered combat protocols." "Not chaos," came a voice from the chamber entrance. Everyone turned to see Dean Vaxthal entering with a human officer. "This is Captain Susan Collins from Earth's Space Command. She's here to help us understand human military thinking." Susan stepped forward, her uniform crisp and professional. "What you see as chaos, we see as tactical flexibility. Our military history taught us that rigid doctrine often leads to defeat. The side that can adapt and surprise their opponent usually wins." She moved to the holographic display and pulled up Earth's military history. "Take this battle from our Second World War, the Battle of Midway. The Japanese fleet had superior numbers and position, but the Americans achieved victory through unexpected tactics and calculated risks. But space combat is different from your planetary battles," a council member protested. "Is it?" Susan asked. "Space is just another ocean, with its own currents, weather, and terrain. We've been navigating dangerous waters for thousands of years. The principles remain the same. Use the environment to your advantage, never be predictable, and always have a backup plan." She turned to another display showing recent training results. "Look at Cadet Richard Kelly's exercise from this morning. He used the radiation from a nearby star to mask his ship's energy signature, just like World War II submarines used thermal layers in the ocean to hide from sonar." Zilnak's scales had shifted to a thoughtful green color. "Captain Collins, are you suggesting we need to completely revise our teaching methods?" "I'm suggesting," Susan replied with a slight smile, "that you need to expand them. Your current doctrine isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. Humanity can add to your knowledge, just as we can learn from your experience." The dean stepped forward. "The council needs to understand something crucial. Humans aren't succeeding despite their lack of traditional space combat training. They're succeeding because of their different perspective. They see possibilities where we see only established protocols." As if to emphasize his point, another alert flashed on the screen. Cadet Murphy was running a new simulation. This time, he had programmed his ship's computer to play something called jazz music through the enemy's communication channels, creating confusion and disrupting their coordination. That's not even a military tactic," one council member sputtered. "No," Susan agreed, "but it worked, didn't it? Humans have learned that victory doesn't always require superior firepower or perfect formation. Sometimes you just need to think differently." The council chamber fell silent as they watched Murphy's unorthodox strategy succeed. Finally, the head of the council spoke. "Professor Zilnak, Dean Vaxthal, it seems we have no choice. The Academy must adapt. Captain Collins, we would appreciate Earth's assistance in updating our curriculum." As the meeting adjourned, Zilnak approached Susan. "Captain, there's something I don't understand. How do you humans come up with these unusual strategies?" Susan smiled. "Professor, has anyone told you about Earth's science fiction? For centuries, we've been imagining space battles in our stories and games. Now that we're actually in space, we're just putting those imaginative ideas to the test. Zilnik's scales turned a new shade, one he'd never displayed before. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to start reading some Earth literature. Commander Amy Richardson walked through the silent halls of the Galactic War Academy's simulation center. It was early morning, and she had a point to prove. As Earth's newly appointed combat instructor, she was about to introduce the alien students to a concept they had never considered: controlled chaos. The large simulation chamber hummed to life as she entered. Professor Zilnak was already there, his scales showing a mix of curiosity and concern. "Commander," he greeted her, "are you sure about today's lesson? The cadets might not be ready for such unusual concepts." Amy smiled as she loaded the simulation data. "Sometimes the best way to learn is to be pushed out of your comfort zone. That's what my drill sergeant used to say." The chamber filled with students from 12 different species. Among them was Cadet Tim Murphy, now in his second year, and quickly becoming one of the Academy's top performers. Next to him sat Laura Bennett, recently promoted to lieutenant commander after her successful tactics had saved 3 civilian ships from space pirates. "Today," Amy announced, "we're going to forget everything you know about fleet formations. Instead, we're going to learn about jazz." A confused murmur spread through the room. A tentacled cadet raised 3 of his appendages. "Instructor, isn't jazz a form of Earth music?" "Exactly," Amy said, bringing up a holographic display of Earth's New Orleans. "Jazz is about improvisation, about taking basic rules and transforming them into something new and unexpected, just like we're going to do with space combat." She started the simulation. The display showed a massive space battle, with ships moving in what appeared to be complete disorder. "This is footage from the Battle of Saturn's Rings," she explained, "Earth's first major space conflict. We were outnumbered 3-1 by the pirate fleet, but watch what happens when we apply the jazz principle." The Earth ships began moving in seemingly random patterns, but there was a hidden rhythm to their chaos. Small ships darted between the rings of Saturn, using the ice and rock debris as cover. Larger vessels performed unpredictable maneuvers, never staying in one formation for more than a few seconds. "The pirates couldn't target what they couldn't predict," Amy continued. "Their computers kept trying to calculate our next moves based on standard combat algorithms. But there was no pattern to calculate." Professor Zilnik's scales had turned a fascinating shade of purple as he watched. "But the fuel consumption must have been enormous," he protested. "Actually," Laura Bennett spoke up, "these maneuvers used less fuel than traditional formation flying. The ships took advantage of natural gravitational forces, just like jazz musicians use the natural flow of rhythm." Amy nodded approvingly. "Lieutenant Commander Bennett is right. Now, let's try something practical. Everyone, take your positions in the simulator pods. You're about to experience controlled chaos firsthand." The simulation placed each student in command of a small ship. Their mission was simple: protect a civilian space station from an incoming enemy fleet. But there was a catch. "Your weapons systems are offline," Amy announced. "You'll have to find another way." The alien students froze in panic. No weapons? It went against every principle they'd learned. But Tim Murphy was already moving his ship toward a nearby field of space debris. "Remember what Commander Richardson said about jazz," he called out to his fellow students. "Use what's around you. Make it up as you go." What followed was unlike anything the Academy had ever seen. Murphy used his ship's tractor beam to gather pieces of debris, creating a makeshift barrier around the station. Other students began to catch on, using their ship's energy fields to redirect scattered asteroids and space junk. Laura Bennett took command of the defensive operation. She organized the students' ships into small, flexible groups that could quickly switch positions and roles. When the enemy fleet arrived, they found not a standard defensive formation, but a constantly shifting dance of ships and debris. "Look at the enemy's reaction," Amy pointed out. "Their targeting computers can't lock onto your ships because you're not where they expect you to be. You're playing jazz with space itself." Professor Xilnak watched in amazement as the students, inspired by Earth's unconventional approach, turned the simulation into something entirely new. Ships spun and weaved through the debris field, using the space station's gravity to slingshot around it, all while keeping the enemy fleet confused and off balance. "This is more than just tactics," he murmured. "This is art." The simulation ended in victory for the defending force, without a single shot fired. As the students emerged from their pods, their eyes were bright with excitement. All four eyes, in some cases. "What you've just experienced," Amy said, "is the future of space combat. The old rules said you needed superior firepower or perfect formation to win. But humanity learned long ago that victory often goes to those who can adapt and improvise." She brought up a new display, showing various battle scenarios. Earth's military history is full of examples where smaller, more flexible forces defeated larger, more powerful enemies. The American Revolution, the Battle of Britain, the Tet Offensive, all victories achieved through unconventional thinking. A crystalline student raised her hand. "But how do we know when to follow standard protocols and when to improvise?" "That's the beauty of it," Laura Bennett answered before Amy could speak. "You learn the rules so well that you know exactly when and how to break them, just like jazz musicians." Amy smiled. "Exactly. From now on, this class will be about more than memorizing formations and protocols. We'll study Earth's military history, learn about guerrilla warfare, and yes, even listen to some jazz." As the students filed out, Professor Xilnak approached Amy. His scales had settled into a new color, one that indicated deep thought. "Commander Richardson," he said, "I believe we've been teaching war as a science when we should have been teaching it as an art." Amy looked at the simulation results one more time. "Professor, it's both. Science gives us the rules, but art teaches us how to break them effectively. That's what humanity brings to the galaxy, the art of controlled chaos." Outside the simulation chamber, Tim Murphy was already teaching a group of alien cadets about an Earth game called Hockey, explaining how its strategies could be applied to space combat. The revolution in space warfare had begun, and it was starting right here in the Academy's halls. The Academy's main battle arena was packed with observers from across the galaxy. Today was supposed to be a simple graduation exercise, but it had turned into something much more important. Carol Summers, a fresh graduate from Earth's Fleet Academy, was about to face the Academy's top instructor, Master Kex, in a live space combat exercise. What made this match special was Carol's unusual choice of ships. Instead of taking command of a warship, she had asked for control of 3 mining vessels and 2 cargo ships. The audience whispered among themselves, wondering if this was another strange human trick or just foolishness. Professor Xilnak sat in the observation deck, his scales showing a mix of green anticipation and blue worry. Next to him, Commander Amy Richardson smiled confidently. "Your former student seems very sure of herself," Xilnak said to Amy. "But Master Kex has never lost a demonstration battle in 30 years of teaching." "Carol has something better than experience," Amy replied. "She has imagination." The battle arena came to life as huge holographic projectors created a realistic space environment, complete with an asteroid field, a small sun, and various space debris. Master Kex's warship, sleek and powerful, moved into position. Carol's small fleet of civilian ships clustered together, looking awkward and vulnerable. "Begin," announced the computer. Master Kex made his first move exactly as the textbooks suggested, a direct approach with shields at maximum, intending to intimidate the weaker opponent. But Carol's ships didn't retreat. Instead, they split up in 5 different directions. "Interesting," muttered Dean Vaxthal, who had joined the observers. "She's making herself into multiple targets." The mining ships suddenly activated their industrial cutting beams, tools designed for breaking up asteroids. They weren't weapons, but Carol used them to slice through nearby space debris, creating a cloud of small objects that played havoc with Master Kex's targeting sensors. "That's not regulation use of mining equipment," Master Kex protested over the comm system. No rule against it, Carol replied cheerfully. Just being efficient with my tools. The cargo ships then did something even stranger. They opened their massive loading bay doors and began ejecting their cargo, hundreds of empty storage containers. The containers, tumbling through space, created a maze of moving obstacles. Master Kex's warship was forced to reduce speed to avoid collisions. His targeting computers couldn't get a clear lock through all the floating debris. Meanwhile, Carol's mining ships were using their powerful tractor beams in an unexpected way, not to move asteroids, but to grab the floating cargo containers and hurl them at high speed toward the warship. Those containers are reinforced to survive space travel, Amy explained to the amazed audience. They're not weapons, but at these speeds, they might as well be. Master Kex's shield generators were working overtime to deflect the barrage of improvised projectiles. His warship's energy reserves were dropping faster than expected. Still, he was confident. After all, civilian ships couldn't possibly defeat a proper warship. That's when Carol revealed her true strategy. While Master Kex was distracted by the cargo container assault, her mining ships had been carefully positioning themselves in a triangle formation. Their cutting beams, originally designed to break up asteroids, crossed paths directly where Master Kex's ship was about to be. "Checkmate," Carol announced. "Your ship is in a kill box, Master Kex. My mining beams won't damage your warship directly, but if you move in any direction, they'll slice through your shield generators. And with your energy reserves depleted from deflecting my cargo containers." The simulation system confirmed it. Master Kex's ship was effectively trapped. If this were a real battle, he would have to either surrender or risk losing his shield generators, leaving his ship vulnerable to even the weakest weapons. The arena fell silent. Then Professor Xilnak started clapping, his scales now a bright orange of excitement. Others joined in, until the whole arena was filled with applause. But she didn't even use proper weapons, one of the alien observers protested. That's exactly the point. Stephen Wright, Earth's representative to the Confederation, spoke up from his seat in the diplomatic section. Humanity learned long ago that anything can be a weapon if you use it creatively enough. Carol didn't just win. She showed us that we need to completely rethink what we consider combat capabilities. Master Kex's holographic image appeared on the main display. To everyone's surprise, he was smiling. "In 30 years, no one has ever defeated me in a demonstration battle. But more importantly, no one has ever made me question everything I thought I knew about space combat. Until today." Carol's voice came over the speakers, humble but proud. "I just applied what I learned from studying Earth's military history. The British didn't expect farmers with hunting rifles to defeat them. The Germans didn't expect scrap metal factories to be turned into tank factories so quickly. Humans have always been good at using whatever tools we have available." The dean stood up, his crystalline form catching the light. "This demonstration has shown us something crucial. Our rigid classification of military and civilian vessels may be holding us back. We need to be more human in our thinking." Later, in the Academy's main conference room, the faculty gathered for an emergency meeting. Holoprojectors showed Carol's battle from multiple angles as they analyzed her tactics. "Look at how she used basic industrial equipment in combat-effective ways," Amy pointed out. "The mining beams as cutting weapons, tractor beams as projectile launchers, cargo containers as obstacles and projectiles. She turned simple tools into a combat system." Professor Xilnak nodded, his scales now a thoughtful shade of green. "We've been so focused on teaching proper military doctrine that we forgot the most important lesson. Using what you have effectively is better than having the perfect tool. The humans have a saying," Stephen Wright added. "Necessity is the mother of invention. Throughout our history, we've had to make do with what we had. It taught us to be creative." The dean turned to the assembled faculty. "It's clear we need major changes in our curriculum. We've been teaching students what to think, when we should have been teaching them how to think. As the meeting continued, Carol's victory was already becoming a legend among the students. In the Academy's halls, cadets from a dozen alien species were looking at their training equipment with new eyes, wondering what else they could do with it besides its intended purpose. The revolution in space combat doctrine had reached a turning point, and it all started because a young human graduate decided to take mining ships to a warship fight. 6 months after Carol Summers' remarkable victory over Master Kex, the Galactic War Academy looked very different. The once rigid halls now buzzed with energy as students from all species worked together in new ways. In the main lecture hall, Professor Xilnak stood before a fresh class of cadets, his scales glowing with a warm orange enthusiasm. "Today," he announced, "we welcome our new Earth advisors, Commander Paul Martinez and Major Linda Morris, who will help us understand how humans turned their planet's long history of warfare into an advantage in space." Paul stepped forward, pointing to a holographic display showing various Earth battles throughout history. "The key to human military thinking isn't about having the best weapons," he explained. "It's about adapting to any situation with whatever tools you have." In the simulator rooms, the changes were even more dramatic. Gone were the old, predictable training scenarios. Instead, students faced challenges that required creative thinking. Linda Morris supervised as a group of cadets tried to defend a space station using only maintenance robots and repair tools. "Remember," she called out, "the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't expect." The alien students were beginning to understand. A crystalline cadet used maintenance bots to create a reflective shield wall, confusing enemy targeting systems. A gaseous being figured out how to use the repair tools welding beams as makeshift weapons. In his office, Dean Vaxthal reviewed the latest training results with Professor Xilnak. The numbers were impressive. Combat effectiveness has increased by 300% across all species, the Dean noted. "The human approach is working better than we ever expected." Xilnak nodded, remembering how skeptical he had been at first. "They've taught us that rigid doctrine is a weakness, not a strength. Look at this exercise from yesterday." He played a recording showing Tim Murphy, now an instructor himself, teaching a class about Earth's ancient naval battles. The students watched in fascination as he explained how old submarine tactics could be adapted for asteroid field combat. "The humans call it thinking outside the box," Xilnak explained. "Though I still don't understand why they put their thinking in boxes in the first place." The Dean's crystalline form sparkled with amusement. "Speaking of boxes, have you seen what Laura Bennett is doing with the cargo ship simulations?" They pulled up another recording. Bennett had taken Carol Summers' innovative use of civilian ships even further. She was teaching students how to turn cargo containers into temporary defense platforms, using their gravitational stabilizers to create disruption fields that could confuse enemy sensors. "The old me would have called this a mockery of proper military doctrine," Xilnak admitted. "Now I see it as brilliant improvisation." Suddenly, an alert flashed across their screens. A real pirate fleet had been detected near the Academy sector. The Dean was about to call for standard defense protocols when he stopped himself and smiled. "Let's see how well our new training methods work in a real situation," he said. The Academy's defense fleet launched, but not in the traditional arrow formation. Instead, they scattered in seemingly random patterns, just as Commander Richardson had taught them. The pirate fleet, expecting standard Academy tactics, was completely unprepared. In the command center, Paul Martins watched proudly as his students put their training to use. They turned nearby repair stations into improvised missile platforms. Maintenance shuttles darted between larger ships, using their small size to disrupt enemy formations. Even the Academy's waste disposal units were used effectively, with cadets releasing clouds of harmless but sensor-blocking debris. "Your students learned quickly," Linda commented to Xilnak as they watched the battle unfold. "They had good teachers," he replied, his scales showing a new color that seemed to combine all his previous shades. "Humanity showed us that our greatest weakness was believing we knew everything about space combat." The pirate fleet soon retreated, having failed to penetrate the Academy's unexpectedly creative defenses. Not a single Academy ship was lost in the engagement. Later that day, the Academy held a special ceremony. The High Council had finally approved the complete overhaul of the curriculum, officially incorporating Earth's military history and tactical philosophy into all courses. This marks a new era for the Academy. The Dean announced to the assembled students and faculty, "We're not just teaching space combat anymore. We're teaching innovation, adaptation, and creative thinking." Professor Zilnak took the stage next. "When humans first joined the Confederation, we thought we would teach them about proper space warfare. Instead, they taught us that there is no such thing as proper warfare. There is only effective warfare." In the audience, Carol Summers sat next to Master Kex, who had become one of the strongest supporters of the new curriculum after his historic defeat. "Did you ever imagine your mining ship strategy would lead to all this?" he asked her. Carol smiled. "Honestly, I was just trying to pass my graduation exercise. But that's the thing about human creativity. Sometimes the best innovations come from simply trying to solve a problem with whatever tools you have available." The ceremony concluded with a demonstration by first-year cadets. They showed how they had adapted Earth's historical tactics from various periods: guerrilla warfare, naval combat, aerial dogfighting, and even ancient Roman legion formations, into effective space combat strategies. As Professor Zilnak watched, he realized that the Academy had gained something far more valuable than new tactical doctrines. They had learned to question everything they thought they knew, to look at old problems in new ways, and to never stop innovating. "The humans have a saying," Paul Martinez told him after the ceremony. "The only constant is change." Zilnak's scales shifted to that new combined color again. "Then perhaps that's what we should really be teaching. Not just how to fight, but how to change and adapt." In the years that followed, the Galactic War Academy became known not just as a military school, but as a center for innovative thinking. Its graduates were valued not for their ability to follow doctrine, but for their creativity in solving problems. And it all started because humanity refused to fight battles the proper way. The Academy's new motto, suggested by Linda Morris and proudly displayed in the main hall, summed it up perfectly: "Victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable." Even the pirates learned to fear Academy graduates, never knowing whether they would face a traditional military response or find themselves being bombarded with creatively repurposed civilian equipment. As for Professor Zilnak, his scales had permanently adapted to show that new combined color. The other faculty members started calling it Human Innovation Blue, a fitting tribute to the species that had taught them all to think differently.